Well, with that, we move on to the final session of this evening. This is a panel discussion titled Role of Artificial Intelligence in Post-COVID Recovery. And I'd first like to welcome and introduce the members of this panel. Deepali Goenka, CEO and Joint MD, Wellspun India. Professor Anindya Ghosh, Heinz Real Chair, Professor of Business, Professor of Technology, Operations, Statistics and Marketing, NYU Stern School. Ali Hussain, CEO, Eros Now. Saurabh Kumar Sahu, MD and Lead, Applied Intelligence, Accenture in India. And this panel will be moderated by Vinod Mahanta, Senior Editor, The Economic Times. Vinod, over to you.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Salman was always very inspirational, but today, I think he outdid himself, especially the fact about, the whole world falling down and now we need to crystallize. I think that's a very good point for us to also think about. Very good evening to all the guests and delegates and my panelists, and welcome to this session on role of AI in post-COVID recovery. Just to lay down some context, I'll just speak for a minute and a half. Now we are nearly about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, and never have I seen the CEOs being more afraid and, dare I say, clueless. I mean, it's part of my job to speak to CEOs every day. The tsunami-like impact of this global pandemic has just drowned out foresight. It's impossible to basically predict what's going to happen next week, let alone next year. Earlier today, I was speaking to the co-founder of Airbnb. He said, we went from growing roughly 35% year on year to losing about 80% of our revenue in a span of few weeks. In the last 6 weeks, every week we have seen dramatic growth. Recovery has been much better than expected. But that may not happen with everyone. Each business will follow its own trajectory. And now, as businesses are reopening, most are staring at a new reality, an altered marketplace, new ways of working. The current crisis, if you see, it has also forced organizations to open their eyes on, new ways of working with customers, suppliers, and colleagues. And it looks like as if the recovery plans will have a big digital push. Some say that we have been vaulted 5 years forward in consumer and business digital adoption in a matter of 8 weeks. And so in this crisis, the thing is, what will it take to win? How will AI fit into the digital transformation plan? How will AI help deal with continuing unpredictability? To answer this and many other questions, I have a great panel today. I have a manufacturing CEO, I have a services CEO, I have a world-renowned academic, I have a consultant with me. So I think I'll direct questions to each of the panelists, but please feel free to jump in anytime during the discussion. I think we will start by you, Deepali. Given how businesses are reeling under the coronavirus pandemic-induced slowdown, is there an imperative now basically to adopt or scale up AI? I know that there is going to be a very big digital push, but given the every single day you must be in crisis, some sort of crisis. How do you think in terms of AI adoption will help at this point of time? So you can bring in the manufacturing perspective, Saurabh can give us the consultant's view, and Ali can brought about the services angle later. Deepali.
So I'll tell you one thing, with COVID, the whole digitization and the AI has in fact come in more faster than we would have imagined. And I'll just give you a few examples before I come to what it is. According to the IDC data, around 175 zettabytes of data will be generated by around 2025, compared to 33 zettabytes that were generated in 2018. This is nothing, but it is about that so much of data that will be there that AI will have to really have a big role to play. And AI basically actually will also be, we are comparing it now. AI is to the 21st century what actually electricity was in the 20th century, and where it actually transformed the manufacturing. So now, Vinod, when you talk about COVID and us and manufacturing, I think it has been a great learning for all of us CEOs here. First of all, like looking at how to deal with it. How can we repurpose our businesses? How can we save our people? I think with our factories are working now completely with social distancing norms to the COVID protocols, everything, 100% capacity. But I mean, there is a fear psychosis. There's a fear, how are you going to save our people there? So I think that's very, very important. So how the social distancing, how we can, so we have created a WellHeal app, actually. So that actually geofences, geo-targets the people accordingly. And so we feel that, we know that we can really map, apart from the Arogya Setu app. So that is something I feel is going to be important. Disruption has been the key. Disruption actually, Vinod, for us, even to the extent of meeting our customers virtually, running the factory floors virtually. I mean, all our meetings on the shop floor of our factories are being done virtually. Our audits are being virtually done. Our inspections are being done virtually. So the idea is, Vinod, I think it's important to see that it's a new era. It's a new era, and I think people like us will have to imbibe it and embrace it with open arms. Otherwise, the world is just going to leave us behind.
Sure. Saurabh, if you want to bring in a consultant's perspective.
Sure. Thank you. And I hope I'm audible. And I completely agree with Deepali's synopsis of this. I think the need for AI is now more than ever before, right? Whilst earlier in the past, AI was definitely a big enabler, but now it has become an imperative for sure. We have consumer preferences which are dynamically changing. There are shifts to online, more essential buying, lesser frequency of purchase, and the likes of it. The supply chain disruptions is something where there's a paradigm shift in terms of a need for more rapid and high frequency planning. Workforce productivity is in the virtual environment, as Deepali was indicating, again has become a challenge, but at the same time it needs to be tackled.
Yeah.
Cash conservation for most companies is now a primary area of focus to look at where is it that certain costs can be optimized, at the same time revenue growth to be looking at. So actually the CFO's role in these times has also become far more important because such a situation is absolutely unprecedented. And more importantly, apart from the consumer behavior, the supply chain background, the workforce productivity and the likes of it, I think there is now an ushering of a newer business models coming in, wherein you see corporate houses or companies moving from a product to a service, much more closer to the consumer or the customer and the likes of it. And for tackling all of these, there is definitely need for a real-time high processing of data, resolving this demand-supply balance, and taking decisions much more real-time as possible. All of this can only happen at this kind of frequency, at this volume of decision-making, only through a very intelligent human plus machine combination. Now, that human plus machine is the most powerful combination, which is greater than sum of its parts. And that's ultimately is an imperative of AI.
True that.
Ali, if you were to talk about how it's affecting how AI can bring in changes in services.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having such an esteemed panel. It's good to have each and every CEO from different kind of walks of life, represented and talk about artificial intelligence. So, the interesting part of our business is we've got two aspects of our business. Right? One is our traditional kind of movies business, where we used to kind of distribute films on theatrical audiences around the country and around the world. The second aspect of the business, which I represent, is the digital business, and there we connect with the customers on a daily basis, right? And I strongly believe that a lot of the innovation, especially within the digital businesses, actually starts from media and entertainment, because that's the highest point of engagement that the customer has today. Pretty much each and every one of you on the panel and in the audience today would be probably watching 2-3 hours potentially in lockdown, which has been a good time for us, even longer sessions for movies or online video and series, right? So unlike some of the other more slightly archaic businesses or the manufacturing businesses, we've had the luxury to kind of prepare for both the lockdown in terms of how we're able to collaborate with our colleagues, our peers, not just in India, but around the world. Including things like GitHub, which is a platform for sharing code and technology, right? So we've been more prepared, and our transformation from worrying about an offline to online world was pretty quick because both the colleagues, the people, and the larger kind of management was slightly better prepared how to kind of work virtually. I think that was one big advantage of leading the kind of digital piece, or holding the digital flag for a long time. And I think picking up what Saurabh said, I think it's important to understand that the importance of AI is also the human being in the AI. We keep thinking that we watch films like Her and we've seen some of these other things and assume AI to just be a bot. But there is a human behind the AI that's essentially got to make the intelligence behind the AI. So what we've been doing is working on several kind of AI models already because we're collecting consumer data of viewership on a daily basis. We understand behavior patterns. Some of the interesting things we can talk about during the session is how are we doing things differently to make the AI smarter. So I believe that it's important for every business today to adopt that level of understanding the fabric of the customer, creating what we call as customer cohorts, and ensuring that you create this kind of machine learning to be able to deliver a better service, maybe a lot more efficient, and ensure that you're able to drive customer love over a period of time.
You've spoken about two businesses. One is the traditional businesses, and you had the digital business. Do you think basically all the digital natives have an advantage over the traditional business in this scenario?
I think
Dipali is disagreeing. We'll have your answer first.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, right, so if you look at the company structure, right, so I think the company thought about it in two forms. One was, how do you take films like Tanu Weds Manu and Vicky Donor and Bajirao Mastani and entertain family audiences around the country? So that's a large part of the legacy of the business. But at some point, again, this was mentioned, is when you look at transformation, what is the future got instead, right? And I can share interesting facts about how this country is changing, how people are changing. So I think it's important to understand of how to future-proof your business. I think that's a word we talk about frequently, but how do we ensure that we're genuinely making attempts, right? Now, the risk with large businesses is that because they get comfortable within a certain setup, how do you kind of deliver the power to innovate within the business itself? And there's no right answer to that question. So I think the good thing with our business is, whilst movie watching and going to cinemas on Sundays or whatever it was a culture that this country has been living for a long time, we developed the culture of kind of how do we get ready for 2025 or how do we get ready for 2030, right? And they launched the kind of video OTT business in 2012, which was 8 years ago. So there is a significant amount of evolution that's gone about in the learnings, because the best way to kind of, they say the best way to teach a kid how to swim is to jump in the water. So I think that's what we did a long time ago.
Sure. Dipal.
So I know whether Anindya would like to say something. Otherwise, I would like to just pitch in here.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think I'll start by talking about two things. We've heard now from a few people that, COVID is obviously a catalyst for digital transformation. And from my perspective, being at a university training employees, future employees and executives, I think of two things. The first thing is, what sort of new organizational structure will emerge in many companies after COVID? And the second is sort of, what would this whole remote work environment do to employee morale, and what can we do to actually boost employee productivity? So when it comes to, organization skills, it starts with human skills, right? And so one of the things we've been doing at, higher education universities in the US is thinking about what would the post-COVID transformation look like when it comes to, curricular changes or, new instructional courses, more vocational courses and so on. And I think, we can talk more about these issues as we go along. But I do think that as organizations think about, workplace intelligence to boost employee productivity, it's really important to bring back this idea that, workers who collaborate are better at innovating, right? And so at the end of the day, human beings are social animals. We're not used to being isolated, even when you're working remotely. So how do you maintain individual productivity? What sort of, mechanisms will actually keep employee morale and productivity at levels prior to COVID? I think that's still an open question. So I'll end there by saying that I think we have some solutions to the organization structure, but we don't quite have a good deep answer into what sort of skills are needed to in the remote work environment. Thank you, Deepak.
So I think, Vinod, for me and listening to everybody, I know, when you talk about manufacturing, the thing that comes to mind is a very traditional, and at that, a textile manufacturing, definitely. But I'll just give you the perspective and the use of AI in our complete value chain. So we have farmers who grow cotton, right? And we're working with Better Cotton initiatives in the fields. We have an AI app which we've given the farmers to manage and monitor the rain, the soil quality. So it starts from there. Apart from that, as you, and in this kind of an, our machines are completely IoT, linked, so that you can see, we can actually literally connect and see the on-time performance of the machines. The importance of also having CBOTs where they can do the cut and sew. Wow. Then you have the AI-enabled quality robots, because those are important, because your human eye tends to get tired. So that actually, it becomes a very important aspect to what we're doing in quality control. Apart from that, we have the shared service, and there also all the mundane reports are completely AI enabled. They've completely been transformed there. Now with this whole, the whole transformation that actually took place, where the whole apps that were used for our for our traceability for our COVID pandemic, that was something that we really took on completely, and analytics. So I think it's easy to talk about when you're talking about towels and sheets and you're delivering in 50 countries globally. You're looking at the markets, you're looking at the demographics, and that's where the AI really comes to play. It's without that, like looking at, on the West Coast of, suppose, United States, if a certain quality of towel sells, what would be what would be the other color that will be selling on the other side? So, that again becomes a very integral part of what we are basically doing. To that extent, even to understand your consumer, and Ali rightly said, actually the consumer, how you understand the consumer behavior. So looking at the analytics, it also gives you an insight into what the consumer will buy. And of course, and as I pointed out earlier, now the whole era of the complete virtual walkthroughs to virtual, conversations with our customers. I'll tell you one thing, we are thinking not to have a showroom later, because we will transform and run our customer through a virtual showroom. A virtual factory is already on the play right now. So I think I will just say that, for us, every level has been a very integral part of AI enablement in our industry, in our factory. Just a last bit, when this COVID struck, and we are in these areas which are completely, in a kind of a corner of the world where the doctors are not available. So we have this AI-enabled robot doctor, which can actually connect to any doctor globally. So, that is something also that we connected on. So definitely, and when I think, Anindya, you spoke about the workplace, the AI, how our people are feeling, I think that actually is so important. So we have an AI-enabled thing called Amber, which actually tells us what's the mood of a people, how are they feeling. So I think the whole thing, you would say that manufacturing is the last bit where it would be. But I think from the consumer behavior, the buying pattern, to the analytics, the supply chain, to our manufacturing machines on the IoT, to our people and to our farmers, I think the whole thing gets linked incredibly.
Sure. See, one of the things about this problem is that no one really knows how it's going to impact sectors and how they're going to behave after some time. Airbnb never expected such a fast recovery. So my thing is, which are the sectors where it will impact the most, and which are the functions where impact will be felt most? We can get Anindya in, then Saurabh can come.
Sure, Vinod, thanks. So I think at the outset, let's think about what AI really is, and then we can take a step deeper inside. basically what AI does, it enables this virtuous cycle between data, algorithms, more usage, which leads to more data. Right? So better data leads to better algorithms, which leads to more consumer engagement, which leads to more data. Okay? Now, there are certain steps involved in that in terms of industries that are likely to recover faster or do better. So, for example, conversational AI, we've already started seeing some of that. Cloud-based AI companies, essentially, as work from home increases, we're going to leverage more and more of cloud capacity. You'll see increasing, demand for cybersecurity roles and cybersecurity skill sets, because as we work from home increasingly, we will need more secure systems. And the flip side of security is privacy, so we'll see that as well. So, in terms of the industries where you will see increasing jobs, because there's always this fear that AI is going to take away jobs, I don't necessarily see it that way. I think AI is going to create at least as many jobs as it displaces because of this, data engineering powered economy, right? So you're looking at a structure where you need people who can do data engineering, algorithm development, experimentation, and software, right? Each of these 4 components are, critical to an AI-based organization. And as COVID is sort of expediting this digital transformation, you will see increasing demand for people with these skill sets. And we see that in the higher education system where, jobs are shifting away from, let's say, traditional finance into tech, right? And I think this is the way I would look at it, this structure.
Sure. Saurabh?
Yeah, I think interesting take for India, and I prescribe and agree to almost all of them. In my view, frankly, AI is a manifestation of God now. It's going to be everywhere. Frankly, every function and every sector will not be immune to it and should not be immune to it. But obviously, there are quite a few functions or sectors which have a natural inclination to it. But at the same time, I think this COVID crisis has kind of brought everyone at the same level. Your earlier question, which said that digital native companies have a leg up over the others. The beauty of AI is that the results can be so quick, and the output and the action can be so fast that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then companies go one top of the other and then go ahead and do it. Deepali's example of a so-called traditional mindset of a manufacturing company now talking about a virtual showroom is a manifestation itself. But in terms of the top functions, I believe supply chain is one which has been fairly disrupted and has asked for a paradigm shift in terms of the planning frequencies. Typically, what you could look at monthly is now talked about weekly and now even daily, right? And only AI can enable this level of granularity in terms of planning. Secondly is companies are looking at to be as close and as in a high proximity to consumers. Therefore, e-commerce, digital marketing, and direct-to-consumer platforms are newer revenue streams, that alternate channels that companies will now therefore look at becoming more mainstream. And thirdly, in terms of finance, which is, I would say, the CFOs are now going to be far more AI augmented in terms of optimizing working capital, forecasting cash flows, and the likes of it. So clearly, supply chain, e-commerce, finance are key functions. Manufacturing absolutely is another area where what we call as a digital twin. If the entire manufacturing setup can be twinned on a digital platform, and various trainings, various safety measures, protocols can all be imparted through digital and AI means right now.
Absolutely.
I think in terms of sectors, again, as I said, I think every sector is going to be impacted positively by this in terms of AI-enabled growth. There is a natural tendency, uplift with telecom and financial service companies simply because they have been used to looking at volumes of data which are real-time, more consumer-centric in place. But I think retail and consumer goods will pick up the steam in terms of AI adoption going forward. Very interestingly, there are retail firms which are looking at, in apparel business, which are looking at using AI for even product design. Right, so in terms of looking at sales analytics, feeding back into product design, a customer can try out different kinds of sizes, colors virtually, and the number of visits therefore in terms of actually making a purchase goes on dramatically, improves the conversion cycles. You will have automotive companies, which typical again automotive large giants of manufacturing historically, with iconic brands in place, and today you have dealers who will therefore be looking at giving you an entire experience of a vehicle or a car virtually, where you can look at the upholstery, feel the leather, look at how the lighting would be, the ambience around it. All of that can be virtually customized. And therefore, that's the part of literally creating a twin through AI in terms of whatever human behavior can manage. And that's where I believe this is where it is headed.
See, one of the things about AI is that, it started as some kind of experiment in the technology department, and then some bit of marketing came in. But has it become a CEO and a board level issue? Because companies like to talk about latest things that they are doing. They talked about outsourcing some years back, then data and analytics. Now AI is in conversation of all the CEOs that I interact with. Do you think, both Dipali and Ali, that this conversation has reached the boards and the top management C-level? It has become a C-level issue?
Dipali, should I go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let me illustrate that. So the short answer is yes, but I'm assuming that's not the answer you want. Let me give you a specific and a very interesting project, right, we're working upon, just to give you a sense of the depth of how AI is kind of contributing. The use case might seem small, but the adoption is massive, right? So currently, historically, when we used to take films and distribute them in countries like Indonesia and the Middle East, they used to be either subtitled in Arabic or subtitled in Bahasa, sometimes even subtitled in Tamil, Telugu, and different languages, right? Recently, about a couple of years ago, we released Bajrangi Bhaijaan in China. So we actually dubbed the film actually in Mandarin or Chinese, for example, mainland Chinese. What we're trying to do right now as an AI project is trying to make the computer understand different languages, different diction, and teach it how to be able to almost train it with a particular diction, train it with a specific tone, and train it with a language to be able to generate dubbing and subtitles on the fly. So you might feed a product that might be come to you in Hindi. We kind of strip out the video and the audio separately. The audio is then dynamically converted into a Bahasa or an Arabic language or any language that we would train it to kind of teach, right? That's level one. That's not the end goal. The second level is, if there is a celebrity in, say, Hollywood, a celebrity in China, I can train the machine to understand their voice and their diction. So it's not only speaking the language in Arabic or Bahasa, but it's speaking the language of a particular celebrity. That's step two. Step three is, we're not only training the AI to understand the language, the diction, the celebrity, but also training it to train the lip movement. So the lips will also move according to the way you speak in that particular language. So has it become a board level or a CEO issue? The answer is yes. A lot of the things that I'm talking to you about, right, and you talk to the biggest technology companies in the world, there are solutions for this that are not available. So what we're doing is, it's an evolutionary process, and it's kind of cyclic in nature, to make sure that you're able to train the machine with as much information so that the AI becomes more effective. I'm just giving you one example. We're working on
this can have a disruptive effect on basically the transcription industry and also the subtitle industry in India. This is a big business.
Yeah, but to counteract to the question, right? So Anindya mentioned this, the number of people that work as voiceover artists to be able to do that, they might actually, I don't think they'll go out of a job, but we'll hire those many more data engineers, we'll hire those many more engineers to be able to program and train. Because the minute you're able to start doing this dynamically, imagine that content can cut barriers and cross borders and travel to different parts of the world. So the fact is, you're becoming a flattened economy of sorts around the world is something that will become more popular through the means of video. So I'm just giving a small example that why it's such an important topic, because again, to make sure that you're relevant in the future, again, from a customer lens, you need to keep ensuring that you innovate with time.
Sure. Dipali?
So, to Ali's point, and I think for us at Wellspun, I think, and when somebody said that, with AI, jobs will go, or, this translation, I mean, there are a lot of people. But beautifully so, I think AI will coexist. You will need the human touch. You will need that experience. Like, for example, I mean, if you're coexisting, like, if you have cut and sew, like, you have a robot doing the cut and sew, but you're not going to have everywhere that cut and sew robot, but it can also get the perfection. It can be used for training. So, that's where the things will start pitching in. I mean, it's going to definitely coexist with wherever, we can look at. So I'll just give you a small example, which I did it during these days, which is not exactly to the high tech enabled thing, but sort of. We did Jugaad omni-channel for the Indian marketplace. We all are aware of omni-channel globally with retailers, offline and online. But in India, where it is such a fragmented landscape, where the sales and distribution and the mom and pop stores are so predominant. So what did we do there? Customers are fearful of coming into stores. Business is completely down in India, where the whole country was reeling under the lockdown. How do we reach to the consumer? The customer is not going to come to you. So what did we do? We basically made e-digital catalogs with their inventory. We worked out and geo-targeted that area with the customers. And we started actually sending them WhatsApp and started selling the products. So I would say the necessity and the need, I think, will create the need for AI and the evolution of where it can lead to. So everything then definitely coexists together. It can, you can talk about I have this beautiful bedroom or a kind of a showroom walkthrough where I can change the bed sheets that kind of need, how the mood is and how we can change the colors and all. That's technology. But again, it will also need the hand and, the touch of a consumer to feel how soft that sheet is or how that towel feels. So I think it definitely is going to coexist. So for me, I think everybody tells me that jobs will go, but I think it's beautifully going to coexist to a world that will be very, very different.
Sure.
Can I add one thing to Dipali's answer? I think just to piggyback on Ali and Dipali, the way I look at this whole issue of AI and jobs is think of three categories of jobs: translators, explainers, and sustainers. Okay, these are the new categories of jobs that are likely to emerge. Translators are the ones who are actually essentially training the algorithms to understand the complexities of human communication. Explainers are the ones who will actually be the bridge between business and tech, and then sustainers are the ones who will actually ensure compliance. In fact, Saurabh, one of your colleagues at Accenture had written something about this a couple of years back, and I thought it was a pretty amazing article.
Right.
Sure. So Anindya, one question basically that historical data and forecasting models will be of little use basically due to the massive economic and structural shift caused by this pandemic. Can AI help build those models?
Yes, absolutely. In sort of AI has two sort of legs to it, right? One is called causal econometrics. The other is predictive analytics. So something of like COVID is what we refer to as a black swan event, which lends itself very nicely to what we call, event studies. What happens? What are the factors driving consumer behavior before and after? So there are several, methods and models in place, both from causal econometric modeling and predictive statistical analysis, that allow us to use these black swan events and to extract the relevant data before and after in order to train the future algorithms. Okay? And in fact, in many ways, in order to better predict, what the world is going to look like, which is always going to be a notoriously difficult problem, but also an incredibly important problem, you'll have to rely on these models from both the causal and the predictive aspects of AI.
Sure. A lot of companies are, as I hear the answers, it's clearly a surprise as to, where two Indian organizations are so far down the curve. In terms of, there are a whole lot of companies who will want to put in building blocks. How should a company go about building blocks in terms of, building a model which is driven by AI, which has data included, which is the next generation technology involved?
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please. And then Saurabh can jump in.
Okay, so I think I'll sort of take us back to this, the basic fundamental premise of an AI-driven organization is understanding the relationship between this virtuous cycle of data, algorithms, consumer usage, and back to data, right? So if you get that right, then we have to go back and reverse engineer, like how do you actually ensure that virtuous cycle? How do we get more consumer usage from better algorithms, from better data? That requires these 4 building blocks. Right? You need data engineers, the ones who are going to be cleaning, processing, querying, storing the data. This is all raw, dirty data. It has to be processed, cleaned, and stored in order to enable predictive or causal modeling. Then you need the next layer, which is people who will take these data sets and perform various sorts of analytics experiments. They'll test hypotheses. They will build models to predict what the future will look like, and then go back to the experimentation stage. This is a different set of skills. So this is a very different set of skills from the data engineers I'm talking about. And then finally, sort of superimposing all of this, you need the overall software infrastructure, the APIs, for example, that will enable this seamless conversation between the data engineers and the business analysts, right? So this is again a third set of skills. It's very difficult to find one person who has all three skills. So more likely we're going to see multiple opportunities for hiring, because each of these three skill sets lends itself to a niche set of skills that is likely to be far more dispersed as opposed to concentrated in a person. So I would say those are the three pillars of building an AI-driven organization. And as long as we are training the workflows with the right set of skills, we are likely to come out stronger after this.
Yes, sorry.
Thanks, Vijay. That was a good deep dive. And I just have a simple 3S policy towards in terms of setting up the AI building blocks. Not because my name starts with S, but the 3S is strategy, skills, structure, right? And the first is simply about having a very concerted AI strategy, which is focusing on value. What is the business impact of the value that AI can essentially generate and unlock trapped value in an organization? That needs to be very clearly articulated. The second part is about skills, which I think Anindya very beautifully articulated, right? Both in terms of the skills required, the technology which is required to enable this. The third is around structure. The structure has to be linked well to strategy. It has to create a center of excellence that empowers decision making, has the right set of people leading it, and clearly is in the C-suite. So the structure is equally important to the strategy and the skills in terms of how AI is built within an organization, how it is incubated, and in terms of the leeway given for decision making. Now, all these three S's, either companies can build it, they can buy off the shelf, or they can partner. Right? And I always, therefore, put in for a hybrid method in terms of focusing on value. The first is of strategy. It could be partner-led, because use the power of the investments and the entire aspect of AI-led business transformation, which has already happened, and leverage that. The skills can be a mix of building some internally and buying off the shelf or partnering with the right players. And in terms of setting the structure, obviously, is an internal capability that needs to be housed. But I think one key thing, and the fourth S, which therefore is important, is scale. Now, most companies nowadays probably make the mistake of saying, let me look at one particular use case, one particular function, and then see what I can do with it and move forward. But that creates a bit of too much of a stress in the system. Scale is important for AI. It then feeds off each other in terms of multi-functions, different people looking at a business goal rather than just looking in their own domain. So go big, go look at transformation of the entire business and do it at scale.
Sure.
I want to come at it, if you don't mind, I want to come at it from a different angle, right? So the way, and I think Anindya and Saurabh have absolutely given fantastic answers, but I think there is slightly, simplistic way of also looking at it, right? I think we sometimes tend to over-intellectualize or over-complicate some of these situations. I think the power of AI is linked at source in terms of data sources, right? So anywhere we're able to kind of get a vast set of data sources, you're able to empower the machine to be able to train it and develop an algorithm in a fashion. So I think in addition to what you've said, if you're a customer-centric, either a B2C or a B2B2C kind of business, being as close to the customer and collating as many number of data sources, because that empowers the algorithms of the machine that you're developing. I think that's the first point. The second one is about agility, right? So what happens is we tend to spend a lot of time developing the right models historically. I think it is important to ensure that you get them out faster and do this concept called the POC, which is the proof of concept. I think putting that out to test is very important. And the third, which I believe is one of the most important aspects, is culture, right? Historically, we've been in a culture that we should not fail, but I think it's a culture now of called fast fail. So I think consumers are also at some level acceptable if you fail fast, course correct, and you keep improving your model, right? So I think the concept of fast fail as a culture needs to be imbibed within the organizations at large for you to understand that it's okay to fail, because it's only when you make that mistake is when you will actually improve the model. And that's the whole kind of premise behind AI.
Sure. Questions are flying in thick and fast. I mean, I've just been inundated with questions. But using the moderator's privilege, I will ask one last question before I move to the audience question. How do companies move from legacy system and ERP system to something which is new, AI powered, which is an AI powered platform? I'll keep it open. Whoever can come in.
You want me to answer that, or
you can start?
Okay, so as I said, right, I'm going to pick up. The reason why I want to just kick off is I think it's also about the culture, right? What happens is a lot of the colleagues that have been around for a while, I think Saurabh brought this up in terms of empowering the right people, and it needs to be C-level, right? I think kind of that fear of using something new or using an unknown becomes one of the challenges because we're humans at the end of the day, right? It's humans operating the AI. So I think my short answer to this will be empowering the right people to make the mistake, to ensure that you're able to use and adapt to new systems, and ensure that you're able to fuel it with sufficient amount of data. That would be my recommendation to all my colleagues.
Sure. Deepan?
For me, I think, I would say I agree with Ali there, but there's an important thing to this is also about the existing people that you have. Can you reskill them and upskill them? I think that's also a very important aspect of doing what we need to do. Like even when we're talking about manufacturing or a B2B to B2C, I think that a lot of times we will have to look at reskilling and upskilling of people. The shop floor people, to my sales teams, I would give an example, simple, to upskill their skills as well. So I think it depends. I think it depends upon how the whole structure evolves.
Sure. Professor Anindya?
Yeah, I think the one thing I will add to Ali's and Dipali's comments is, somewhat piggybacking on them is, I would phrase that question a little more differently. I think what I heard you say is, how should an organization move from legacy systems away into AI-based new media systems?
Largely, if you see informations are ERP-based and you have old technology
right.
set, this would be a completely different set of skill sets in terms of people, also technology platforms.
Right. So I would say, I've sort of advised, a bunch of large organizations on their digital transformation journeys. And one of the things I've seen is that we shouldn't be thinking of discarding the data from legacy systems. There's tremendous value that can still be tapped in those legacy systems, whether it's ERP or CRM or SCM and so on. But what we should really be looking for is how do you leverage your existing data systems and use that in combination with the new data or the new algorithm that's coming out through your AI transformation. So sometimes organizations make the mistake of saying, hey, maybe we should just, not use our legacy data at all. I don't think that's the best approach. You'll be better off in the long run by leveraging both the new data and the old data.
Sure. So I'll just move to the questions. Dipali, there's a question for you. With this new kind of technology adoption, skilling workers will be a very big challenge. Was it an added cost to you? You have put AI in. You added Internet of Things. You built apps, and you put AI into various functions. Was it an added cost?
No, I think when you're talking about a people, they're asking about the training of a people. That's what they're.
About the cost of training people.
So see, at textiles, you'll anyway have to skill people. So the training is a constant process at textiles. We have a skilling center, and with this, I think I'll just give you you have these GETs, the graduate engineer trainees. You gradually get them into the system and evolve them. They become the supervisors on the floor, and at the same time, you have these people whom they train. So it actually is a process, and it gradually happens. So you know what? I think when you talk about AI, I think it's a culture, and the culture will need to be evolved. And it is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. But I think if they see the merit, if they see that, their work gets easier, definitely they will imbibe it. And that's what we are working on.
Sure. Another question basically for Anindya. As we try and accelerate AI itself as a technology, will we be able to do justice in terms of checking bias from developing?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is something that we always struggle with, and we are cognizant of, the inherent problems that happen when you haven't cleaned or trained your data to remove the biases. And so it takes me back to the first step I talked about, how you build an AI-led organization. Your data engineers, who are often the unspoken heroes of these organizations, because these are the people who are responsible for cleaning the data and removing those biases in an iterative process with data analysts. Now, the reason I say the unspoken heroes is because a lot of senior leadership are probably not, and Dipali and Ali can probably speak to this. They're not getting to see the hard work or the importance of the work they're actually doing, but they are doing a tremendous amount of relevant, critical work. Good news is, to the question is, over time there have been sort of advances in machine learning that have enabled us to remove some of these biases. I wouldn't say we have completely nailed it. I would say we have come a long way, but there's still some progress to be made there.
Sure. I think I have about 23 questions more, but I won't be able to. I've been told to close this session. All I'll say is basically, clearly, after listening to all of you people, that AI is clearly no silver bullet in this crisis, but it will be a very important part in terms of if you want to win in the future. And winners, I think, will put software, data, and AI at the core of their operational models. That's basically two of the things that I took away from this session. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm really sorry for the delegates, and 22 unanswered questions. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all.
Thank you. Have a fabulous
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod, for moderating this session. It was very enriching. We really wish you could have taken more time. A big thank you to all the members of your panel, Dipali Goenka, Professor Anindya Ghosh, Ali Hussain, Saurabh Kumar Sahu, for your time. Well, with that, we come to the end of the Economic Times Unwired Reimagining Business GBS virtual series, this being the second series, the theme being prescriptions for a post-COVID economy. Before you log out, I must tell you that we had more than 1,200 leaders from across India that logged in today. And that's very inspiring for us. Stay tuned for the next series in September. Thank you for your patronage and participation. Continue to participate and patronize future events from the Economic Times and the Times Group. A big thank you to all the speakers and members of the panel, the moderators who took time off from their very busy schedule. Even though we are at home under lockdown, we have busy lives. So we are very grateful to all of them. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a good night. God bless.